So with no further ado, I'm going to launch the day, and really delighted to welcome our colleague, Dr. Leonor Rodriguez Estrada. And Leonor, you're so welcome back to Galway. Some of you will know Leonor, who has spent time with us at the university and has been a fantastic colleague as a postdoctoral researcher with the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre. Leonor is now a lecturer in psychological research methods at the University of Edinburgh, and our focus, we're delighted that Leonor is able to be here today. I could spend a lot of time listing all of your areas of expertise and specialism.
No, please don't.
Those of you who have done research, those of you who've done research and studied with us will know Rodriguez, as we sometimes sort of summarise the reference in work, really fantastic research that Leonor was involved in here, and particularly in relation to family support, MEHL, youth participation, a whole range of interrelated areas. So if you haven't met Leonor, you might have probably met her virtually, or realise you've been reading her and now realise this is the great author who we've been inspired by. And I am really, today Leonor is here to talk about learning from her new book, which is on technological innovations in participatory health research with adolescents. And when I saw this notice coming around, within a day I had said to colleagues who were in agreement, we have to invite Leonor over to help us to learn about this, because it's an excellent book, and it covers a whole range of really innovative approaches in relation to how we enhance participatory research, particularly using technological and innovative methods. As many of you will know, in the UNESCO Child and Family Research Centre here at ILAS, sort of one of our key kind of priorities is developing participatory research approaches. We also sort of really emphasise multidisciplinary learning, and this is part of a research training series that is focused particularly on inclusive methodologies. So this opportunity fits really well with those overall aims that we have, Leonor, and the overall goals that we have in relation to developing our research methods. So nobody's here to listen to me go on any further about that, Leonor, I can assure you. And I really am thrilled to welcome you, Leonor, and to hand over the lead to you, and to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us in Galway.
Thank you. The session is mostly focused on the book because of the title of the series. What I try to do is to extract the parts that are more relevant for us to understand and to think about inclusion and equality and ethics and all the issues that are related to that in participatory research and health. There are going to be some activities as well. It wouldn't be participatory research if I was standing here all the time. I don't like that. So because there's very few of you today right now in the room, I know you probably know each other, but I don't know you. So if you can just tell me your name and what you do, like if you're working, if you're studying, please let me know, because now you know me, but I don't know you. So I would like to get to know you, and there's a reason for that as well. So okay, so thank you very much for introducing yourselves. And what I just did purposefully was something very important in participation as well, which is get to know your audience, get to know the people, get to know what's important to them, find a way to relate to them, find differences, find commonalities that you can find with people. And this is so important to be able to create that space. Like probably in a different or a larger space, I wouldn't have the time to go one by one and talk to people, but that is so important when you're talking about participation. And it starts from those little things where you start knowing like who is interested in what. When I'm talking, I will remember what people like, and it's a way to engage and validate people as well, and recognize people, which is in essence a lot of what participation is in practice and not just in theory. So we're going to do a few things today. I have a beautiful plan that I might not stick to, in the sense that particularly in time, like I will respect the breaks and that, but I might not be in exactly the place where I'm supposed to be. But we'll get there, I can promise you that. So as I said, one of the things that I try to do is to take that aspect of the book that is in relation to the seminar series, which is enabling equity in the life course. So you're going to find like little paper people at the end of your table, and some pens and colors. So basically what I want you to think about is, what does that mean to you? What does enabling equity in the life course mean to you? And on one side of your paper person, you're going to write things that you relate that might be very internal. How do people understand this internally? Their feelings, their ideas, their emotions, things like that. And on the other side of the paper person, what I want you to think about is the world outside, more institutionally, like how about the government, policies, school, all the things that have an impact on this idea of enabling equity. So one side is the inside, the feelings that people have about what is really like or should be like, if I read the instructions and not just explain it. And then the other side, it's kind of how it appears to others from the outside, the institutions, it explains they're kind of being inside a noisy place where you get or you feel alone. It's kind of that idea of, this is me on the inside, this is me on the outside, and probably everything that impacts when it comes to enabling equity. So I'll give you a few minutes. There's pens. And if there's so the purpose of the exercise really was to make us realize that when I'm going to move to the other side. When we think about participation, we're dealing with many things on the inside, ourselves as a person that believes in participation, as a person that is going to lead a session that is trying to be participatory and what that means. And you're going to see that I'm going to insist a lot in, to me, participation starts with that adult person that decides to walk in and create a participatory space. And a lot of the things I'm going to say is, you have to create that space of participation. It has to be created. It's not going to happen out of nowhere. It's definitely not a given. And as I was coming here, I remembered that this place is so special in that sense, that we can walk about the building, and in a way, participation and children and inclusion and rights, and this is our language in this building. But when we go out into the world, that's not the language that the rest of the world speaks. Even now that I work in a different institution, the ethos is very, very different. So we need to, and one of the things I wanted to achieve today is, if I walk and people can get the ethos of the center in me when I speak, I will be happy with that, because that's what I believe in. So no matter where I am, that's the ethos that I'm going to talk about. But there is resistance out there, and I can give you examples of things that happened very recently to me, and I spoke to Caroline about this yesterday. And that's what I mean by the difference between the inside and the outside, how people perceive it and how we present ourselves in this context of participation is very important, because we have to create that space, and sometimes that means even swimming against the current. And you'll find yourself swimming against the current in spaces that do not have this type of background, do not have this type of education. If you do research in health, which is what I do and is most applied to health, and some of you do research in cancer as well, you're going to find that that's not necessarily the ethos that we are going to meet. The good thing is that we can create it. And if we bring it with us, we will be able to create it. And if you have to be that stone in somebody's shoes, and if you have to be that stone, be that stone, because eventually the person is going to look down and see, well, this is bothering me. I need to do something about it. So yeah, what I'm saying is that what I'm going to talk about today is a challenge, and I'm going to have some examples of how methodologically you can create those spaces. But to me, most importantly, is who you are and what you bring and how you present yourself in the scenario. And you're going to see that the last chapter of the book, there's a very informal conclusion that says never give up. And that's what I mean by be that stone in somebody's shoes until you can achieve the change that we want to see, and the reasons why we are believing in that change, that this is the best way to work with people, to understand people, to support people. So that was the conclusion of everything I'm going to say, basically. But let's start there. Adolescence and research, and why adolescents. I started working with adolescents during my PhD, and what was interesting to see is that they had been invisible all the time. And in research, it was more about, oh yeah, we're doing research with children between 0 and 18 years of age. And I would question that term. Like, there are many definitions of that. The problem with that was, again, that kind of from the inside, the adolescents were not seeing themselves reflected in there. Like, their experiences were being mixed together in reality and also technically, and in the papers they read and in the books. They did not exist in a way. Like, their age was in there, but their needs, their developmental characteristics, they were not being acknowledged. So when we make someone invisible, you're not seeing them from the inside. What's happening to them when somebody becomes invisible? So part of what I advocate for in this book is, well, give adolescents a voice. Recognize that they are a specific group of people with characteristics, yes. They're not all the same. We are not all the same. But there has to be an acknowledgement that this is a particular age range, a particular developmental stage. And that's why I decided to give adolescents a voice, because I couldn't find them 10 years ago when I started really focusing on research. Like, where are they? So I do a lot of research with adolescents and giving adolescents a voice. And it was interesting when I was, my last piece of research was talking to adults who lost a parent to cancer when they were young. Some of them were adolescents at the time. And one of them said it very clearly. I was not a child, but I was not an adult. So I didn't have a space for myself. Like, I didn't know who I was yet. And then when I went, and this is very important when you mentioned access and awareness, when I went to ask for services, they were sending me to children's services that didn't work for me. And I still couldn't go to the adult services. So when I went, I had nowhere to go. So that's what I mean. The inside and the outside will always be a conflict in participation. If we don't create the right space for that to happen, the inside and the outside will be conflictive. So what I wanted to do with the exercise was think about that. Think about the conflict of the inside and the outside that is happening to this person that we're working with. And the other thing is, as I said, we need to create the spaces, but as a participation person, one of the things that we have to be very clear about, I will always walk in as an adult now. And the older I get, the more adult I will be, and the further away I will be from the adolescents I'm trying to work with. And that's not a problem, but it's something I have to be aware of, that there will always be a power relation difference, just because I'm an adult and they're adolescents. And if we come from the outside world, there is a difference. What I want to create inside my space is that those differences are not as significant. And instead, those differences are going to add to our experiences together. We're going to create an experience together. So working with children and young people, there will be differences as well of who we are in age, in gender, in wealth, in our abilities, in family situations, in our personalities. So we need to acknowledge those differences from the start. They're not bad, they're just differences that we're walking in with. There is an unequal power. What is fantastic about participation is that power is understood in a very different way. So power is not always oppressive, is not always like a problem. It's instead a way that we can learn to build and collaborate together. There is certainly an assumption, maybe not in this building, but in the real world, that when we give adolescents, when we give research participants power, it means we're losing it. But what I would advocate for is no, like we bring our power, they bring their own set of power, and instead we can create something more powerful together, which is going to be a piece of research that eventually could change policy, could change our services, could do so many things. But it's power multiplied, not a loss of power. And I will build on that idea as the morning goes by. And why we do this? Well, because we can empower each other together, and that has been, whether it sounds like an ideal situation, it has been identified by research as something that can be done. And in the work that we do in this place in particular, we have seen that happen and come to life. we can actually work together to achieve our goals and our purposes. And what's very important as well is always to be very honest about this. Like, on paper, it looks very ideal, but when you start working with adolescents in particular, what I always come and tell them what I tell them is, this is what the research needs to find out. This is what we need to achieve. In the end, yes, we need to have a report. Yes, we need to have. So this is what I need. And we make almost like what I just did on the paper over there. What are your needs? What do you want to achieve out of this? What do you bring to this? So we have the conversation of what do you want, what do you expect? And then we have the conversation of, okay, through the research you may achieve this, but you may not achieve other things. And I mean more concrete stuff. I want to learn how to do research, somebody might say, or I want to add this experience to my CV, which sometimes participants can do. So we need to negotiate, like, what do you want and what realistically can we offer you? So that from the start it is very clear what we're going to achieve together from this process. And not just, obviously, the research has to be completed in this case, but then in the process, what do we bring and what do we want to achieve together? Just be careful, and this is what I mean, like, we can't promise things that we are not going to deliver, and that's where the adult comes in to make sure that we have the clarity of what we can do. We're still subject to methodological rigor, to understanding that to be able to publish research, to provide research of high quality, we need to follow certain guidelines, certain procedures. And I always explain this to them. Like, look, we have flexibility around how we do the research or the methods that we choose, but they have to be within the boundary of scientific rigor, for example. And we're going to learn about scientific rigor together. And, you know, it's having this conversation with your participants as well to understand the boundaries that we are within and the liberties that we have within those boundaries. And in essence, it is, don't promise things you can't deliver in the end. So why do I do participatory research with adolescents? And the reason is there are major gaps in adolescents' health needs. So I'm very glad to see more people interested in that area. There is evidence, yes, but there's very little action. So you will not find a lot of evidence-based interventions, for example. There's a great need for those. There are some interventions, yes, but maybe they're not validated. They haven't been rolled out. They're very context specific. There isn't actually like a structure there in place. Again, these are all issues on the outside. The civil structures for advocacy, for bringing people to being recognized, this idea of PPI groups is so fundamental. But in practice, like, they might happen in smaller contexts, and we would like that to be happening. So, you know, there's like, how many of us today? There's like 30 people today who are going to be bringing that advocacy through different contexts and through different places because it's needed. And the other reality is that participation in some countries is still far, far behind than Ireland and the UK. Like, this is not even a notion of what participation is. So depending on the context that we are in, our ideas may be familiar, may be accepted. In some countries, no. And that has a lot to do with their culture, the philosophy of childhood, where they are in terms of how they perceive the sociology of childhood, as well as how children, young people are perceived. So as researchers, we have to be aware of how the outside looks, so we can actually make some kind of change or impact from the inside and eventually to the outside as well. As we know, the majority of research is concentrated on Western countries. Why? Well, because they usually have the resources and the money to roll things out, and that's just how it is. The majority of research with adolescents, particularly in health, is published in English. And the other thing is that younger adolescents, 12, 13, 10, they're still quite excluded. So if you find research with adolescents around health, it's usually the higher end. I don't have the explanation for that. I presume it is, well, they're more verbal. They're easier to probably talk to. And the younger children that we have, the more creative we have to be. And that takes time and that takes resources. And I'm all into that, but some people are not. So that's just a feeling. In terms of benefits, and for me this is very important when I talk about participatory research and how I sell it, I think of it as a triangle. There's three characters in that triangle, three corners in that triangle that will benefit from this. So sometimes we think about the benefits for our participants. Why do we do participatory research? Oh, because children will express their voices, they will feel included, they will increase their self-esteem. And all these ideas that are important, it has shown that it enhances well-being as well. Additionally, particularly in the area of health, it is a way to acknowledge them as consumers of healthcare, and that comes back to the awareness and the access to services as well. How do we get the message there? How do we know if the services work or not for them? We can also improve the standard, the efficiency, and ensure that there's a patient-centered care. Over time, the people that work in this field, kind of what we want to achieve is a fairer, healthier society that can help us overcome inequalities early in life. But these are the benefits just potentially for adolescents. Remember that I said there's a triangle, so I will try to cover the rest of the corners with the following slides. It helps young people to feel part of society. It helps them to improve their critical thinking, increase their social responsibility, their skills for teamwork as well. It increases the knowledge of services, and that's something that you mentioned at the beginning again. And there's also possibilities of what they can achieve as they're part of research, which are even employability skills, for example, how to write a CV. Now I can say that I was part of this research project. I know now that I was involved in recruiting participants, or I was involved in data analysis, so I have all these new skills. So there can be a practical benefit of taking part in research as well, and all these things can help adolescents in the future. What we find with adolescents that have chronic illnesses is that they still have quite a passive role in terms of service and service consultation. They're not very involved in service development. And what's very important as well, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, is that every time I have like a title on a slide, for a presentation, it makes sense kind of to tell you, oh, adolescents with chronic illnesses. But I know, and from a participatory kind of point of view, I know that they're all different, and that we shouldn't think of, oh, this is a homogeneous group, everybody thinks the same, everybody has even the same experience. They don't. And that's why I asked you individually, who are you? What's your name? What do you like? What do you do? Like, I could have just stood here and you would be just the audience to me. But that's not the way participatory research works. I really want to get to know individually how you experience, what you like, what you do, what you enjoy. Clearly, we all have an interest in the topic and we share something together. But we come from very different backgrounds, we're doing different things. And that always has to be acknowledged in those cases. And in people's experiences of even, you might have a chronic illness, which one, for how long, how have you dealt with it? It's always important to get to know those individual differences. So how can we do this? How can we create a more participatory environment? How can we create that in the research and the work we do? So it's important when we choose our research methods to have in mind which ones are going to help us do this. So for example, which methods are more suitable to capture those commonalities and differences? Which methods will have that flexibility that are not expecting kind of everyone to behave the same way, to have the same abilities, to have the same background, to even have the same language? Is it something that I can adapt to a different culture, to a different set of skills? As I said, to me it's very important that adolescents and researchers, we're not all the same. All participatory researchers are not the same. We have an interest in common, but we may not always like the same methods or the same strategies, or we just have different personalities. Like, I would be the one that if I have to bring paper people and color pencils and play on the ground, I will do that. Whereas there are others that are still doing participation and may not like end up playing on the ground with the children. I would do that. But that depends a lot on who the researcher is. It's important that we choose methods as well that, as I said, can adapt to the different needs, languages, backgrounds, ages of the children and adolescents we work with, and not just, it's just going to be easy for some of them to deal with this material, but it might not be for others. Sometimes we might think that some kids are very comfortable drawing. There are kids that might not like to draw. So then we need to think about another option if that happens to us in a session. They might like to cut something, or to create a collage, or to maybe build something with their hands. So why not have some sort of other material there where they can express themselves, not necessarily through coloring or drawing, but we need to think about these things ourselves to be prepared for them. And obviously try to stay away from situations that will instead reinforce inequalities. I don't know, think about children that may have limitations around their language. How do I make this method more image-based and not necessarily word-based, depending on who I'm with? One of the things that I've noticed that works really well, and I've used it in my research as well, is having multiple methods. And as I said, well, this kid doesn't like to draw, so I have, how do you call this? Is it plasticine? Play-Doh. Yeah. So maybe bring something like that, and they can work with that and create something. Maybe in my research, sometimes I allow them to work. Okay, if you don't want to do an interview, would you like to answer these questions, or would you like to complete the survey? So they have a choice of which part of the research they want to be part of. They don't necessarily have to be part of everything. Of course, that has methodological implications for me, because then my sample of 50 might become my sample of 25. But then these are kind of the negotiations that we need to make. Like, is it more important to me to have 50 participants, or is it more important to me to have happy participants that are engaged, that are happy to do the research, that feel good in that environment, and that will genuinely tell me how they feel about this topic? Or do I just want participants there that almost feel like forced to be there just because I want a sample of 50 and nobody is moving me out of that situation? So there are gains and losses in this, and those are the things we have to think about, and what we are comfortable with. Maybe I want a sample of 50, but then recruit 75, for example, which is more time for me, more work for me. It might not be as easy to get, but think about the ways around this to make sure that your participants are happy and you get quality information. Another thing is the experience of the research team. Like, make sure people are comfortable doing these methods. In technology, sometimes people don't like working with technology. The researcher doesn't like working with technology. Some of you are already working in technology, and that's fantastic. But I knew that even today, some of you might not like technology, might not work with technology, might not feel comfortable with it. So I never have the expectation either that all adolescents are going to like technology, and I'm going to say that in a minute. Like, there's these ideas sometimes of, oh yeah, they're tech savvy, so they must like to use this particular. Some of them don't like that. Some of them are not interested in that. So we just have to be aware and have a plan A and a plan B, or a plan C if we were in that situation, so that they don't, if they wanted to take part, they don't feel excluded, because then the purpose of what I was trying to do is completely lost. So we have a lot of power in terms of the research and the methods that we choose to be able to create that participatory kind of environment. Training is important, and I insist on this. Participation requires sometimes that we provide the skills for children and young people to actively take part, particularly where we're working with technology. And that's the reason why all of you got a participant pack, because I want you to have the resources that I'm going to be talking about. I want you to be able to take part of what I'm talking about. But you need that information to be able to feel comfortable to take part. Like, I can't expect adolescents to just come in and know how to use a particular set of software. No, I have to teach it to them first. And then the research might happen more successfully because they know how to do this. They feel comfortable around it. So training is very important. If we are going to ask them to run interviews for us, to analyze data, they have to be trained. They need to learn this information before they even agree to do that or not. So again, this takes a lot of time. Participation takes time. Participation takes effort. Participation is not easy to achieve. I would say it is worth it, but it's not going to magically happen. It's something you need to build by stages, and training is one of those stages. The setting is another important thing. It's not that different from regular research that we do with children and adolescents. We have to be very careful about the space to make sure that our participants feel happy and comfortable in that space. Sometimes we go to schools and do research, but then find out that, maybe they see a teacher they had a problem with walk down the corridor, and they're not going to tell us exactly what was happening because those people are there. Is it okay to go to their houses? Is it safe to go to their houses? Is the topic adequate, for example, to be in their house and ask these questions? So think about the space where they are going to feel more comfortable, and we are going to be happy as well to interview them. Home is not necessarily a safe place. Home is not necessarily a happy place. So we shouldn't assume that that's the best place where we can go talk to children and adolescents. Sometimes I might allow them to control the recording devices themselves so they can actually feel the power. So I will show them how you turn the recorder on and off. It's not something I keep. It's something I give to them. So I tell them, if at any stage you want to stop the recording, this is how you do it. And then you turn it back on. So that little thing can seem like, oh, I'm giving the child the power. Yes, I am. Because I'm telling them I want them to have the power. So I have to physically show them that that's exactly what I'm doing and what I want them to do. I'm crazy, as I said, I'm crazy when I go children, adolescents. I bring decorations to the space. And I put a welcome sign on the door, and I bring stickers, and I bring all sorts of things. Because that makes them feel like a happy place, like a place where I thought about them. It's not that I just landed here. And that's kind of what I did with you guys. Look, I went and bought this paper people because I was thinking about this activity that I wanted to do with you. And in a way, I'm telling you, well, I was thinking about this long before I knew your faces, long before I came to this place. I got this all sorted out. I was thinking about you. I printed those little cards that you see, and I cut them, every single one of them myself. So in a way, you can express that little kind of affection and concern and really care for your participants. And how do they see that? Because they walk into a place that is decorated and happy and has Mickey and whatever crazy theme I might be in at the time. Those little things mean a lot to create that space. Like, oh, look, she went through all this trouble to do this. Is not essential. It's not a component of participation that you're going to read in the books, but it is a component of participation that I have learned over time that works, that helps create that first impression, that helps create kind of that welcoming environment that is going to get children, young people feeling happier and probably more engaged into whatever it is you in the end want to share with them. As I said, think about, is school setting the best setting? And if that's the only setting we have, how can we make it more friendly? Always have a balance between serious and fun. That's kind of me, if you haven't noticed so far. I use a lot of that. I bring humor. I know my humor is not necessarily culturally adaptable, but I'm very me when I stand in front of an audience. I'm very me when I stand in front of children and young people, and that in a way allows them to be themselves. And it's this idea as well of how we structure the space. Do we have like a school setting? Do we want to create a space that is more rounded, for example? This is can you see that? No, you can't. Okay. Participation sometimes is, particularly when I was very new into participation, I thought it was one thing that you do. What I'm really fond about participation is that it is so incredibly flexible, and it looks in so many different ways. and you can still be under that participation umbrella and doing very different things. It's kind of an ethos, it's a philosophy, it's a worldview that you have, but inside it there's a lot of flexibility. So you can have, for example, your participants take very different roles, and those roles might look very different in terms of what you're doing. So you might have participants that are actually driving the recruitment process. They might be sharing information about the study. They might help you put up signs in places that are important to them, or give you ideas of the places that you can go to that they spend their time in. That's always very helpful, to consult with children and young people. What spaces are important to you? Because I might not be aware of them. The library, the swimming pool, we like going to the football matches. So by talking to them, you kind of start finding strategies of which are the right places to go and recruit this kind of people. I've had research participants that have designed the logo for the research. I did a study for children with hemophilia, and it was the children themselves that designed the logo for that. And then I made it like pens and stickers and things, so they felt very proud, like they felt that was theirs in a way. So that helps a lot to create the identity of a group. Those of you that are doing PPI and are doing group work, it helps them very much to build that sense of belonging when they see their work is taken into consideration to that level. In other authors, as you can see, they help to draft the interviews, and I have seen that and done that as well. Kind of, perhaps I will have like a draft of what I'm trying to ask, but I consult with my potential participants. What do you think of these questions? What else am I not seeing? What am I not asking? And they will tell you. I think Chen was very brave. I don't expect anyone, I don't know why I'm not using this, but what I'm referring to is this person here. So all his study was about adolescents themselves doing the data collection. They were obviously trained to do that. I'm not that brave yet, but if you want to read it, the way he did it is quite interesting. But there was training involved in how to do this and how to but he sent like 2 young people to do the recordings for him. Holland did the analysis of transcripts, and that is okay. The only issue, if you want to do that, the only issue that you might come across, and it's important to think about, is how do we keep confidentiality within a group of people that might end up knowing each other. So part of what he did was anonymize the transcripts before they were analyzed, but he as a researcher did that, and then the kids actually worked with the anonymized transcripts. Depending on what the topic is about, I think that would work. If it's very personal information or still very identifiable information, we just have to be very careful around how to handle that. But if it's not a very invasive topic, I think that would work very well. I've done dissemination by young people themselves. So they designed, we wanted to do a dissemination video, and they created the whole story. So I just presented the results to them. These are the results of the research. What do you agree with? What do you not agree with? And they came up with a video of a situation in school. So they created the script. They wrote the script, they acted, and on that occasion, there was a kid that was very interested in filming as well. So the person that was doing the video kind of gave him the camera, which I thought was very brave. But the kid ended up doing part of the filming for us. So what I mean is, when you recognize that children have specific characteristics, interests, or talents, you can use them as well. And that, well, of course, he felt very, very, very important. And he was very, very, very important. But it was really beautiful to see him kind of really engaged and moving around and trying to get the best shot. And I had to act as a teacher. That was not great. But they produced their video, and it was something that was very close to their heart. And it was disseminated. It was with Foroiga, this piece of work. So it was very interesting to see everything that they can do that can surprise us. As I've insisted, to me is very important when you're trying to engage in this participation kind of world, is being very aware yourself of where you are, of who you are, of what you believe in, and what are your own limits as well. Like, I'm not expect anyone to dress up as Minnie Mouse or to wear Minnie Mouse ears, which is some things that I do. Like, I have like the ears, and I walk in and I dress up and I go crazy. I don't expect anyone to do that. But what I mean is, you need to get to know yourself, what you feel comfortable with, how silly you are willing to seem in front of your research participants. Because in the end, they know I am the researcher. They know I am the adult, but they know I'm an approachable adult, maybe, a less rigid adult, maybe. I think this concept of conscious co-design is very important, and this was introduced by Bowler in 2021. And what he's saying is that participation requires a lot of self-reflection as well. You have to be very aware of what you're doing, what you believe in, how you conceive or perceive your participants, their rights, their understanding, how you want to engage them. Be very self-aware as well, whether you're happy yourself in that context, in using these methods, in talking to people like this, in giving up your power. You have to be quite happy to do that, to remove that hat of, I am the very serious researcher from X university, to I'll be playing here on the ground with you because I love doing that, which is a completely different role that I have as me as a human being. So there has to be like a deliberate awareness of where you are, where you're standing, what you're comfortable with, what you can do in terms of even your personality counts, not just the knowledge you have and the experience you have with methods, but who you are as a person. And the impact that you think you can have on children, young people. What impact do you want to have? Like, I always try that my participants learn something, get something out of the experience. And it could be just a fun time, or it could be something like a skill, teaching them how to do a sonification project, teaching them how to do programming or something like that. Like, that is too big and it requires time. But there has to be something that I always want to give them at the end of the process. So that was basically my part of research and adolescence. Some of the concepts that are important as well and very related to the seminar has to do with diversity and inclusion, and how are we very aware of understanding who we have in the audience, which is kind of what I try to do at the start. Who are you? What do you bring? What is your background? I would obviously spend more time with my participants trying to understand them. What are you interested in? What do you like, etc. So, as I said, we started talking about differences in power, and I briefly mentioned things like age, gender, your background, your nationality, your culture. All of that will create a difference. So I like this quote from Kirby and Bryson, who says that ethnicity, affluency, and deprivation create uneven levels of participation for adolescents in general. So what we need to be aware of is that we're starting from the difference and recognize that difference. And how do we work with that difference going forward? And particularly in participatory spaces, we need to be very aware of the differences that exist. So our decisions will help us very much to understand, include, and be aware of those decisions. One of the things that is still a debate kind of in the research is whether we should include adolescents that are selected to be included in the research, or should we make it like an open, like adolescents themselves can self-select to be part of the research. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes when you do research in schools, the teachers will select the participants, and they might go for the strongest students, for the ones that they know they can express themselves verbally very well, Or you might end up working with all the students that are in the student council, for example. They are a specific profile of adolescent, which will give you the information you want, probably, with very little trouble. But what happens when you open that to anyone who just wants to be heard, and they might speak and I can speak about that, like their first language may not be English. So they're not as easy to communicate their ideas as others. So the decision begins even in the selection process of who and how we're going to recruit these people that we want to work with, and how will that impact on our research. It probably requires, again, more time and more resources for us to try to find participants that might help us. And sometimes we have very strict criteria of who we need to talk to. Sometimes we don't. And that, again, will be a challenge for us as researchers to know who might be included and who might not. So Short and Ross kind of created a few guidelines of how do we make the recruitment process participatory as well. And what they're saying is try to select students, or they were talking in the education, in the school context as well. So what they were saying is to try to get students that would usually not become involved in projects. Some students that might have might not be engaged in the student council or in student sports or things like that. Try to find those voices that are not the loudest. Find young people with different needs, from different genders as well, from different ethnic groups. And another option to go around this is to randomly choose them. However, if you're talking about participatory research, if one of those participants that you randomly selected doesn't want to take part, then they can just say that they don't want to take part. But random selection might be a way to get students that would not necessarily volunteer. If you ask them, they wouldn't volunteer themselves, so I can randomly select them and then give them the opportunity to participate or not. But the idea of the slide is to think about the decision about participation starts very, very early, and how I engage people in my research would have an impact on whether or not I can create that participatory space. Sometimes we do need help, and I acknowledge that this might require money. I might need advocates to bring people to take part in research. I might need interpreters as well if I want to include children whose first language is not English, or children that are refugees with very little time that have come into the country. We can meet many different situations. It sounds like ideally I would have an interpreter. However, I do know that I might not have the money to have an interpreter to pay in my research. So that will impact on the kind of decision I want to make and the future limitations that my research is going to have. I've mentioned this before, but always think of alternative methods to capture your data. Not just because they don't like it, but because they can have a choice. And having a choice is kind of one of the components, an essential components of participatory research. You need to guarantee confidentiality. I need to explain to them in easily understood language what that means. Like, I'm not going to release your name or release any of the information, or the research will not have your name, and try to break it down so that they can understand what that means. It's not like a given or easy word to understand. We need to break it down. We need to think about access as well. Depending on the age, do I need the parents to bring the children, or should I come to them? Is it an expectation that I'm going to meet them in school or outside school? Is it something accessible for them? Is it safe for them to come to me? Is it better that I go to them? So we need to think about this more, the practical side of our research as well. Very importantly is this idea of the labels and how they describe themselves. If I am in a particular topic, particularly very sensitive topics, what I would like to know is how children describe themselves, and not give children a label from the start. So I want them to tell me how they would like me to refer to the situation that they're experiencing or to the issue that they have, and use a language that they feel comfortable with. I can have an expert label as a researcher of what I think that is, but it's very, very important to talk to your participants to understand how they perceive themselves and their language, and that only comes with consultation that could be very formal, kind of structured consultation like PPI groups, but it can also be like just have a conversation with them before the research starts. And when you set out the kind of the ground rules or the agreements, I never call it rules, I call it kind of agreements, and we kind of talk about possibly the dynamics that they want to have in a group. For example, if I'm doing a focus group, how they're going to listen to each other, how they're going to ask for their turn to speak, things like that, very basic things. But we do come up with a series of recommendations of things that they're going to be very comfortable doing. I really don't call them rules, it's just like the group agreements or something like that. Because rules outside has a very different contextualization. So we have to be very aware of the language that we use as well in that context. So we need to think about, as I said, things. Can the children come to us? Should we come to them? Do they have transport? Things like that. How are they going to attend the PPI group? How are they going to attend the focus group? We need to think about these things. Is it something that we need to have resources for? At what time is it best to do it? Is it better on a Saturday? Is it better on a weekday? And we need to think about as well parents' commitments or guardians' commitments. How are we going to coordinate all of this? It's not just think about the focus group as it happens, but how am I going to get people in to that focus groups? As I said, try to base on their interests. Some children are interested in writing. Some of them would be more interested in taking photos and taking videos or making short clips of the answers. Some of them want to talk to us, some of them prefer to write to us. So just have the flexibility around the different ways in which we can still capture the information in a way that keeps them entertained. It's important, as I said there, to have a combination of ages, conditions, experiences. When we're talking about PPI groups or advocacy groups, try to make them as varied as it can possibly be. And other advice that is provided is to think about participants that might have like similar ages or ethnic backgrounds to the condition that we are trying to evaluate. So when they feel identified, if we can, then they might be more keen to express what they're thinking and what they're feeling. So another aspect of participatory research, and we have 15 minutes to go, so I think I can cover this in that time, is ethics and safeguarding. Is everyone aware of the difference between ethics and safeguarding? What's the difference between both terms?
Could you just say something maybe?
Yeah. So ethics is kind of the plan that you're going to have to make sure that your research is within the boundaries of ethical standards. Looking at data management, if you comply with data management policies in the EU or in the UK, so it's taking the policy and saying, I'm going to do all these things kind of on paper. The safeguarding part is the ethics in action. What are the things that I'm going to do so that my participants are actually going to feel safe and be safe? So one is kind of more like the principles, and safeguarding will be how do I turn those principles into action in my research? And they're different, because sometimes you might say, oh yeah, I'm following all the data management standards. And then the question would be, well, fantastic. How are you going to do that? Where are you going to, you're telling me that you're going to store data safely. Yeah, so where are you going to store the data? Which drive are you going to use? There are, as you know, there are drives for data management that might be more secure than others. So, okay, which one are you going to store this in and why? So is that putting into action? Yes, I know you're complying with all the standards. You're telling me that you're complying with all the standards, but what are you doing in action, in practice to do that? So we need to really think about the harm versus benefit, and I would say that is the adult's responsibility, and that is the researcher's responsibility. On top of anybody else's, it's ours. If I think it's also important to be quite honest about this. If the purpose of the research is just to produce the piece of research, then it's fine to tell your participants that's everything they're going to get. But they need to know from the start that the purpose of what you're doing is, well, I want to understand X, Y, and Z, and that's why I'm here as a researcher. If you have another possible objective or aim that you want to achieve with your research, fantastic. But be very clear and honest from the start, what is it you want to get? Like, not necessarily, and I'm not looking at anyone around this, not necessarily having like a PPI group, it will translate into any benefit to them, for example. So I have to be very clear to them the process that it takes for this to become eventually action, for this to eventually be a change in policy or a change in practice. They need to understand that just by being there, I can't promise that tomorrow services will be improved and they will walk into better conditions. So I have to be very clear about how much I can reach as a researcher and what the information could do. And that's an ethical thing, because we're talking about, we're taking into consideration vulnerability and competency. And part of the essential ways in which you can evaluate vulnerability and competency means getting to know your participants. Who are they? What are their needs? How are they on the inside? And what are the issues that affect them on the outside? So I have to be very clear about who they are to be able to know and evaluate the vulnerability and their competency. So next question. What is vulnerability? What do you think is vulnerability? Mm-hmm. So what I take from what you're saying is that it is complex. It is very complex. Because we have the individual at the center, but we have all other circumstances that actually do impact on the individual and their level of vulnerability. So there are many definitions for this, and I still don't think I have the right answer for it. I definitely think it's important to think about it, to consider it, particularly when we are thinking about the ethic implications of our research, of our work. So this definition is quite new, and that's why I went for it, and there are some principles there that are quite good. There is you would identify vulnerability in a young person if there is a lack of ability to protect their own interests, if there is a lack of capacity for decision making, like individual autonomous decision making, and as you said, the environmental factors that are preventing their rights, their opportunities, or their access to power. Again, it is a very beautiful definition, but it's a very complex one. So when we try to define vulnerability, we have to look at a whole series of elements that might have an impact. When we're talking specifically about technology, that I haven't even got into that area of technology yet, I'm just kind of building the context of participation, adolescence, and then we're going to go into technology. But one of the things that is very significant in technology, for example, is the digital gap, and how we do know that there are some children and adolescents in certain contexts that will have access and some of them who will not. And then if we walk in as a researcher and, for example, give them a phone and tell them, oh, you'll have access to this through the phone and this app and this and that, but at the end of the research, I'm going to take back the phones. What is that implication in terms of kind of keeping that digital gap and even making it worse? So when we work with technology, we have to be very aware of how we manage that digital gap in the context that we are working with, and some of these things will come up later. What is competency is a more kind of individual characteristics, your age, maturity, your cognitive ability, even moral aspects, your psychological state, and the social environment. And it's important in terms of, as I said, understanding who your children, adolescent participants are going to be. Because not all children are at the same level of maturity, even if they have the same age. And working several years now with children that have illnesses or that have experienced illness, they're generally very aware of themselves. They have more critical thinking, they have more decision making than a person without that experience would have. So sometimes, and Alderson said it, like children who experience adversity usually will have more knowledge, more skills, and just a completely different life perspective and a different background, and they bring these skills to the research. So we can't assume that every child, every 10-year-old child is exactly the same, or every 12-year-old child is exactly the same. It depends on the experience that they have, and we have to mix all of that as well with our own, as I've said now, with our own skills, the skills we bring, the experiences we have, the beliefs we have, and how do we work together around all those elements. So how do we measure capacity? Usually we want to make sure that children and adolescents understand relevant information, that they're understanding the context of the research, that we are doing research and what research is, and what we want to obtain from it. Their ability to retain information, like they remember why they're here, why we're doing this, if they're still happy to be part of this. There will be a capacity to weigh information and to make a reasonable choice. The possibility of making voluntary and autonomous decisions. And number 5, the ability to communicate decisions and the ability to believe the information. What is your first reaction to that list when you see it? Like if you have to evaluate all these things in a child to determine if they're competent or not.
It's a long list. There's a lot there.
It's a very, very long list. And if you break it down, for example, number 3 is the capacity even for critical thinking. I don't think I was ever capable to critical think until I was in college, for example, and I was taught all the skills of how to think more critically. So if you use this list to determine whether a child is competent or not, they will probably fail, as if it was an exam. So we just have to be careful in how we evaluate and determine vulnerability and competence. This is a very good book. She's a very good author. She's written loads of books about ethics with children and young people. And she still provides this list of impossible levels of competency. And I'm not bringing children down or adolescents. I'm probably bringing myself down as a child. Probably me as a child, I would have never been able to do all these things at the same time. So we just have to be very careful the expectations that we have and how realistically these can help us translate something into the ethics and safeguarding of children and young people. This is too complex. Yes, absolutely. And the other side of it is power as well. Remember my first slide, there is a difference of power. So I might come in and ask you, do you understand what I'm saying? They're probably going to say yes. and the reality may be that they don't. But because I come in and I am this researcher in the figure of a teacher, the figure of an adult, yes, I understand. So what I mean is what we see in theory, what we see in paper, we need to be very critical about it and think about how do I translate this in a way that it will be understood, that it will make sense for the age group that I'm working with, for children that may not even speak the same language as me or are living in very difficult circumstances or even children that are really well off. I don't think they will get all of this kind of ticks if I gave them a checklist. It's too hard. So determining competency, we need to be aware of competency and make sure that the children, young people that we engage in the research understand what we are doing. But, we need to be critical about kind of the guidelines that we can find out there because they're not always practical or realistic. Time. To me, it's very important, as I've said, to be very honest from the start. Try to obviously, it's not try to, like a researcher would never intentionally walk in to upset a participant or a child, but we need to be very aware of how the way I present things, the way I present myself as well, might trigger memories, might trigger situations that I didn't want them to trigger. And how do I stop that from happening? Well, being informed about the population I'm going to work with, being aware of the population I'm going to work with. It's important as well when we, as I said, the topic that we want to research with, I am all about participation, and I'm all about participatory methods, but I also think that there are particular topics that are not suitable for that. For example, very personal issues like sexual abuse, things like that. A group context, a participation context may not be the best scenario to begin with. It might be suitable for later stages, but it may not necessarily be my first approach to it or my first go-to approach to it. So we have to be quite conscious of the topics that we are dealing with. And I understand that participation is very, very flexible and it can take many different shapes. But I still do think that there are certain topics that are more suitable for other types of approaches. It becomes more important in the level of involvement that we choose for children and young people. I might still be working from a participatory point of view, but they're not necessarily my co-researchers, or they may not necessarily be reading other people's accounts or reading the transcripts of a particular topic. So think about the sensitivity of dealing with certain topics, certain ages as well. Like there are topics that are not appropriate for certain ages. I perhaps want to be the most participatory person, but I'm also aware that that has limits and that needs to have limits. And part of understanding those limits is being an ethical researcher. Like I don't want to involve children in very sensitive things or things that hurt them, topics that hurt them. It's important that they know as well, as I've said, that not all research eventually will translate into a major policy change, or that what we want to do is to immediately change the world. Like they need to understand that change in this area takes a very long time, and give them an idea of how research works and how it reaches policy and how it translates. And it's very slow and frustrating for researchers. It will be very slow and frustrating for children and young people as well. And it's very important that you always provide feedback. This is an ethical principle. Children should know what happens to their data. Yeah, this woman came and talked to me and I never heard anything from her. So it's important that we have mechanisms in place of giving children feedback of what they said to us, what happened to it, where it went, how did we disseminate it, how did we use it. Give them child-friendly, like little reports or little cards sometimes of what happened to the research. I think it's an ethical thing. I will stop in 1 minute, just go over this. So we need to set realistic expectations. That's an ethical thing. Setting realistic boundaries as well of our capacity, of the time we have, the cost that the research has, the potential impact of doing the research, and the speed in which we expect change to happen from that. And be very clear about data boundaries, like I set kind of these agreements. For example, if it's a focus group, if there are children that know each other, to be very respectful about that. Like, look, whatever we say here, you can't go home and talk about it with your parents, or you can't go home and talk about it with other friends in your school. So it's creating those limits and this how we protect data when we are in these shared spaces, because participation, most of the time, not all of the time, but most of the time is a shared space. So we need to be very clear about confidentiality and how we're going to handle those things within those contexts. So you have a break now. It's the middle of a topic, but I will just split it because it's break time. So when we come back, I'm going to continue talking about research and the ethical aspects of participation. Okay, so there is a couple more slides around ethics and things that we need to think about ethics, and then I'll move to a completely different dynamic to change the energy a bit. So these are principles that were thought about for peer research ethics, but in the context of participatory research, I think they're applicable as well, because we usually, as I said, have group research. It's not the only method, but it usually happens in a group, but in a group context. So we need to ensure that our participants are safe, and that includes not just their personal safety, but as I said, what happens in the workshops, how they got to the place that we wanted them to get to. A lot of the ideas about privacy are important, as I said, because some people might be members of the same community, they might be members, they might be in the same school. So whatever information that is released, we have to make sure that it doesn't get out of the context of the research. Consent is a given. In my head, it had always been a given. Outside in the world, it might not be a given. So we need to be very aware that we do need consent and informed consent from our participants. It doesn't always happen, which is hard to believe in 2025, but it is. And just around what we're going to give participants, there's a lot of discussion around the importance of payment and how participants should be recognized for their time and for any expenses that they had. But particularly with children and adolescents, it becomes more critical, whether it is better to not give them actual money, but things that might be useful for them or things that might be entertaining, like a cinema ticket or a notebook, a pen. I've been in situations in research in my own country with what I gave participants was, don't take it the wrong way, but I was evaluating the quality of life of children with hemophilia around the country. And some of these children came from very, 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 very poor backgrounds, to the extent that sometimes I did part of the journey by car. I could drive to a certain place, but then I had to take a boat to reach the place where this child lived. And they lived in very, very, very poor conditions. So part of the homework that I had before reaching them was trying to find out how they lived and think carefully around what was useful for me to bring to them. Ideally, giving that child a cinema ticket made no sense whatsoever. So what I ended up doing is I actually bought a school bag and I filled it with things for him to go to school. So we got notebooks and pencils and color pencils in the bag itself. So we need to understand what I mean with that. The lesson for me was get to know your participants, get to know the context, make informed decisions practically about what is really, really important. And in that research, there were moments where reality hit you really hard. And I brought an apple to one of the houses. It was like a goodie bag for the kids. So we had apples and kind of little juices and cookies and things like that. And when the little brother, he was like maybe less than 2 years old or something, he saw the apple. He was really, really happy. But what he did was run into the kitchen and he grabbed a knife. And for him, the apple would never be a whole apple for himself. His idea was, if there is an apple in the house, it means we're going to share it. So what he did was go into the kitchen and run to he never imagined that I was bringing a whole apple for him. So when it comes to this idea of what are we going to give our participants, it's so important to understand the context we're in, and what would really be helpful in a way as well. It's not necessarily money. There might kids that might be very happy with a cinema ticket. He was happy with a whole apple for himself. He had never had a whole apple for himself. So that's when kind of the real world becomes more significant. And that's why I share that story, because it stays with me forever. And it's part of the reason why I do participatory research as well, because it allows you to engage at this level to understand the reality of participants and make an impact. So after that very sad story of my child with the apple, we move on to the next slide and talk about this concept of situated consent that is quite useful, and it's something that I like to practice. Again, it comes back to power and how much power you feel comfortable. And what it means is that every time, for example, a child might have given you, they want to take part in the process, and there might be several sessions where you're going to meet with them. I always ask them every new session, are you sure you still want to be here? Like you gave consent to take part in the research, but are you still happy to be here today? Or would you rather be doing something else? I always come with toys when I'm working with children and adolescents, particularly of certain ages, and they always have like the quiet corner. So you can have there like other activities for them to do. I might bring a breathing ball. I'm also a yoga teacher for kids, so I have loads of toys, which makes it very easy. So I bring the breathing balls. I bring games for them to do, not just coloring pencils, which is usually what they get, but I give them all sorts of other activities. I have one really cool that it's like a ball that has a little ball inside, and they have to kind of get the ball from point 1 to point like 20 or something. But it has like bridges, and it's really tricky and interesting. And that's what I mean, like have different things, have more interesting things for children to do, because that day they may not want to be part of the focus group, even if they have said and understood that they were part of a process and everything. What will happen is, obviously that day my research will have less participants, and the days that I will have to report will have one participant less. But it comes down to, am I comfortable with that? Am I happy with that? Or would I rather have a kid there really upset, sitting in this focus group and not wanting to be there? So it's kind of balancing the losses and the gains that we can get along the process. I've insisted on this before, the idea of having variety, and this idea about the importance of ensuring and reassuring children all the time that their information is safe, that I will not release their name, that what we're going to do today, remember kind of the agreements that we made the first day, remember that what we speak here stays here, and we don't go out and tell our friends or tell our parents or any of that. So it just means remind them every time that you see them, and don't take consent for kind of almost for granted. Like, consent is an ongoing process that we build every time we are there, and if we have to change the agreements for some reason, we can, and we have to add more agreements, we add them. So understanding like consent is an ongoing process, and not a one moment with the child signed a paper for me. That was not consent. It's more around, this is something that we understand and we build over time. Safeguarding, these are some ideas of things you can do for ethics in action. Like, I want to respect my participants, but how do I show them that I respect them, or that I'm really concerned about their safety? These are examples from research. So they used, for example, help packs, and these help packs had information about who they can go to if they feel bad after the focus group, or if they need additional help with something. So they literally created something like a little booklet called like help packs, where children had clear information of what to do if they needed help after the session or after they talked to you. There are occasions as well with researchers have had independent project advisors, and they are just literally people that sit outside the room, so they have not been part of the research process. But if a child wants to get out, or if a child doesn't want to take part in a particular dynamic, they need a time out, these independent project advisors is a very complicated name for just a person there that is, their job is to make sure that when the kid doesn't want to be in the space, that they're going to be okay, not get lost outside or something, but give them that opportunity, like, this is too much for me, I need time out, or I need to get out, to make sure that you have that person that is independent from the research. Like, they have not been part of the dynamic, but they're just there, like, this is your well-being person. Again, evidently that would obviously have a cost, I suppose. You could have a volunteer or something like that, but generally, what I'm saying is these things have a cost, but they're worth it. And if you can include them in your applications and justify why you would need or have, when an alarm sounds, for example, we need an independent project advisor to tell us what is going on. This idea about compensation that we already talked about, I'm just I'm going to skip it because I've already mentioned it. This is an ethical issue that has not been resolved yet, at least not where I work and in the ethic committee that I work in. Some participatory research considers that it's very important to approach your population in a non-research situation yet. And what I mean by that is it's important to start building relationships with the people you're going to talk to, get to know them. However, sometimes this happens before ethical approval, and ethical committees might not like that. So you just have to be careful and almost consult with the research committee before you propose this kind of thing. How you're going to approach an organization, how you're going to approach systematically your participants. Other things that you can do instead is identify potential champions that can help you, or key personnel that can give you information about the population that you're going to work with, not necessarily approaching them yourself or building relationships with by yourself in a non-research capacity. And the idea of that is that you are kind of more their equal to begin with. But again, it's just something that ethically we need to balance carefully. And in the context that you're doing your study in, this has to be consulted to make sure you're not doing the wrong thing. Yes? It depends on the topic, of course, but it's more around, it's not that they can talk about the project with the parent, but it's not to release, like if a child tells a part of their story or a very personal account, like we're not going to share specifically, oh, this person said that, and is more that the story itself. But of course the parent has to know that it's part of the consent process. They would know that they're in this project, and usually the consents for parents would say that we will ask children not to share individual stories. And I do tell the parents, like, you can ask them how it went and they can describe all the situation, but what I would like to keep is exactly what each child specifically said about themselves, or they wanted to share in that context, because it was not shared for a parent outside. That's what I mean, that's the level. Okay. The purpose of the exercise was to show you how hard defining participatory research is. I do have answers for them and I will share them with you, but even working in this area is very confusing for me. Like, where are the limits and where are the definitions? And if I move more towards the community-based, but I still want to work with the individual, am I crossing a different definition? Like, sometimes the work we do doesn't fall into any of those boundaries. So it might be the wrong advice, but my advice is you work in these big umbrella called participatory methods, and we sometimes are obligated to really write about, again, in applications, in this kind of thing, we're kind of more limited. We need to choose one of this and make an informed decision about it. But in reality, I might move from one type to another type and take principles from different definitions really in the working action that you do. I will show you the answers. Can I have just a volunteer per group to check, to make a little tick or something if you get any of the answers correct? Okay, so there was a point when you were working that I actually had the slides up there until I realized that I was giving you the answer. I'm like, oh no! so if somebody cheated, that's fine. So community-based would be collaborative approach involving all partners. If you got it wrong, an easier way is just to turn it over and leave the ones that are right. Begins with a research topic relevant to the community. I'm still in community-based. The aim is to combine knowledge and action to achieve social change. That is community-based. It has the potential of transformative and empowering. Yeah. Empowering can go wrong or set up unrealistic expectations. Cannot create sustainable change by itself.
Yeah, there.
Okay.
Well done. You are cheating, Carol.
Very unethical of you. Okay, co-design. Co-design is the next one, and it's space where adults and young people work together. Seek to understand and integrate real-life experiences from participants. Co-design, how only two. Co-creation. Collaborative generation of knowledge. Starting to get suspicious with that table over there. The process where solutions are tailored. Participation design. The end user has an active role in the design process. That was only one. Participatory action research. I expected to get more correct ones here. An empowerment approach for social change. Social change. Social change. Oh, sorry. Participation action research is an empowerment approach. An empowerment. Then it enables participants to develop autonomy. That's still PAR, participatory action research. The next one is an epistemological orientation, which emphasizes the significance of subjective experiences.
What's that under, Leonor?
PAR, participatory action research.
This one here. It's over there. No, it's there. Look, it's up there at the top.
Yeah, it goes behind.
There. EPAR was more obvious. The online version, which encourages youth to carry out research using media methods that are familiar.
Yeah. That's the only obvious one.
Did you get that one right?
We did.
Good. Then it's youth-led participatory action research, where adolescents are trained and supported to conduct research. It privileges adolescents' capacity and power to conduct research. The key was the adolescent bit. Next one, it is intended at promoting social change and improving healthy development in the community. This could have been anything, really. Okay.
Yeah, a lot of them could have gone in many, couldn't they?
Aims to shift power over to one of power with research participants. Then comes YPAR 2, which is, is the technological application of YPAR. YPAR 2, technological application of YPAR, Youth Participation Action Research. It's known as YPAR 2. Yeah, I understand your face. Then is youth as researchers. You should have gotten this one right. Builds youth capacity, engages youth to produce evidence for research. Then motivation is crucial to understand how the project may appeal to adolescents. And then peer research. Creating knowledge collaboratively. Driven by community needs. Again, some of this could have been any of them.
Yeah.
And I was very mean doing that. Integrated knowledge translation. Creates partnerships between researchers and knowledge end users. Mm-hmm. Youth-adult partnerships are the last ones for organizational and community change. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it just show you all these definitions and discussions?
And then maximize the sense of community. So each group, how many did you get right?
All of them.
So that's what I said when you asked me questions. I said I didn't know anything because it was a contest, and it was part of the dynamics that I do as well with young people. So this was purposefully confusing, okay? Because you're out there in the world, and this is the area that you're working with. So I will come back to adolescence and participation towards the end. What I want to go into is adolescence and technology, which was the other part that we've never mentioned at all, and show you a couple examples of, don't die on me. One of the challenges when you're incorporating technology and research and participation was mentioned earlier, but it's sometimes the development, not sometimes, always, the development of technology is going much faster than the ethical side of it, the grant side of it. And even my book, the examples that I showed you now of some of the examples I include are probably outdated now, and my book was published this year and written last year. So when we read technology, we are constantly changing, and things are constantly changing, and that's going to be a challenge when you're trying to incorporate that. So at this stage, sometimes the risks online are underestimated. Like they now exist guidelines, for example, from the British Psychological Society that has a whole set of ethical guidelines for how you do research online and things like that. But because it changes so quickly, we're always behind. So we have to be very critical and keep reading and updating all the time, because that's kind of what happens when we decide to work in the area of technology. We're restricted by access as well, and that's just a reality, not just access that we mentioned in participatory research, but particularly with technology. And doing research in this area is expensive. If you want to use gadgets, if you want to use software, it's very expensive. And there's also the ethical side of it, where the participants can keep it at the end of the research or not. So those are some of the caveats of doing this type of work. And there's the other side of understanding that particular spaces, participant spaces, are also private. Maybe as researchers, we're more conscious of coming into spaces like schools or research centers that we work in, or we're kind of more conscious that is a private place. But in technology, sometimes people forget that a forum, as social media, is a private place for a person, even though social media is public. It was never intended, and it was never written to be scrutinized by research. So the limits of privacy and what is public and what is private are still a bit blur in this area, particularly when we talk about things that are publicly available. They were never intended to become research. And so then we can encounter different problems of how people understand those limits as well. And you can get into trouble. So if you're going to use like publicly available data, because it is public, you still need permission to use it. Certain social media platforms in particular have very strict rules about the possibility of using that data as research, because it was not intended as such. So if you're intending of using that, make sure you consult with them. They do have guidelines, but you can consult with them as well. And ethics committees as well. We are trying to update this very quickly. Yes. I think your first point of contact would probably be an ethics committee to try and ask them what the right pathway is to follow. I have seen that people have consulted with people in law, particularly if they are working with data exchange agreements or things like that. That would be a very extreme case scenario, and sometimes you do have to put mechanisms in place, because you might be using the app from an external company. They're designing it, but you're transferring their data. So there has to be, in our case, for example, which is the example I'm more familiar with, the university does have to get involved in creating those data agreement exchange things, and they're apart from ethics, so you have to consult a different way. So yeah, it's complex, but make sure, even if it seems like complicated, you need to read those things, and if you don't understand them, maybe reach out to them to try to make sure that you're understanding in the way that you're expected. And if they do answer, like make sure to consult with the university authorities with how do you do that and manage data exchange in particular. I've never been in such a high-tech situation. Most of the things I've seen is if you go to a forum or to a participant space, you do have obviously to ask to the person who manages the forum first to allow you to use it. And then what they would usually ask you to do is to write like an informed consent kind of thing, telling people that you will be using this data, that if somebody doesn't want to, that they need to let you know that they don't want to. So it's not an opt-in to the research. It can work as an opt-out. Only people that don't want to be part can say that they don't want to be part. But there's an assumption that if you don't say anything, it means that you're okay with it. Again, there are many discussions about how ethical an opt-out or an opt-in actually are and how that is really informed consent or not, because somebody might have just missed what you wrote and didn't say anything, not because they agreed, but because they didn't see it. But I put this on purpose because it is, again, one of the gray areas of this. And I think you as an individual have to think what would make you happier. Would it make you happier if people opt in, or are you okay with just having an opt out and hope for the best kind of thing, as long as it is within the appropriate guidelines of your university or the institution you're working with, then that can make you help. That can help you make the decision. But it's things we need to consider when we enter these kinds of online spaces as well, which is not just using technology, it's also potentially the use of social media and anything out there that is public information, whether it was intended or not for research. Does that answer your question in a very long way? So this is interesting because this study was carried out in 2018. So they went actually out and asked adolescents, if we created technology for you, they were trying to create an app, I think. So they asked them, what do you want this to look like? So some of the things were expected in terms of, I wanted to be attractive, interesting, and engaging. Of course, not even an adult wants something to be boring. So that answer was kind of expected. What was interesting to me was they wanted to be able to customize it, and they wanted to be able to create an avatar and a character that resembled them, that was their age, that looked like them. And I think that shows very importantly this idea of personalizing things and how, even if it is like an outside thing that you're going to wear, how important it is to them to identify in some way with that. They wanted to be able to create different formats, to change the color, to almost to make it their own. So they were not really interested in the content of the app, but how they could make it their own. The language is, obviously, they were asked about how they refer to themselves, how the topic in particular, how did they express around that topic. This is interesting, and it might have been the opposite to what I just did, but they wanted to be able to have a comparison of their data, particularly if it was a health data. They wanted to see how well they were doing in comparison to others. But what they did request is that it was not a competition, because they didn't want to have that distress of, if you do this, this is what you're going to get. But it was more like being able themselves just to understand where they were placed in comparison to other people, but not to have that competition component that sometimes apps include, or games. So they didn't like that level of stress, and I thought it's very important to consider that kind of thing, that sometimes we do think that they want a competition and win points, and they don't. They actually wanted a very relaxed approach to it. These things are important, the ease of comfort and wearability, and other things that have to be considered as well is the cost. What happens sometimes is, yes? You got reality, which is the other side of working with technology. Like, we need to think about the context we are in. And included in that cost as well is technology. Like some young people, perhaps not in this country, but in other parts of the world, don't have access to internet. We're very restricted in terms of the amount that they get a month to use that. So when we do the applications, for example, you have to include like this amount of money towards giving either a phone or the amount of data that they will require to, if they have to record things daily, their emotions, or complete a questionnaire, like all of that has to be included in the costing. Like, I don't know what your resolution was, but from what you're saying, probably the app for them was not a good idea.
Yes.
We might have to consider a completely different approach, or and that's the challenge of technology. We might come in with some idea that this might work, and we're thinking about how to personalize it, but we didn't think of all those steps before that need to happen. So we need to consider those things as well. These are concepts you came across in your cards. So now we do have fancy names for things as we've evolutionized. So the e-health is the use of technology on smartphones and wearable devices that control kind of health-related. M-health, I don't know why they're different, they just are, refer exclusively to health data or generating health data on mobile phones. That was kind of the idea of that, just to show you where we are and the different terminology that has evolutionized. There are many other methods that we can use with adolescents that have been used. Games, for example. The thing about that, and the reality of it is, sometimes big game companies, not sometimes, always, they have more money than research has. So they will, even if we try really hard to create things and try to keep up to date, something new might come up very, 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 very quickly. So what I've seen now people do is instead try to partner with these bigger companies and do a more of the social side evaluation of these things, but we won't necessarily be doing the ones going through all the process of designing the technology itself, because we will never catch up to that. So consider kind of your positionality in terms of what you want to do, and around research and technology, what type of use you want to do. Like, I don't see myself kind of designing an app from scratch, but certainly these companies that already have one might be interested in understanding the functionality, the design, and things from a psychological perspective. And that's where we kind of fit and fit in, basically. Other things you can use are blogs, mobile diaries, social media with all the caveats that I have explained, wikis and websites. So this is a very nice one that is a wiki created for teen poetry. So it's actually created by teens for teens. It's just an example of why is my thing not working. It's created by teens, and then as you can see, they have safeguarding instructions at the start of how you can join. They're very clear about the type of poems that you can't upload. But in generally, it's quite nice because you can see how adolescents themselves build and create their work. And it can be used for research as well. I had included photo voice as well. It has been used here in the center, so I didn't want to go into the detail. Are you familiar with photo voice? Yeah. So it is considered a technology-based and participatory approach. Everything I wanted to highlight, if you were familiar with it. What I like about photo voice is that the training is included as part of the method. It's not like if you want to, you can train participants to do this, but photo voice has the training included as one of the steps. So that's, I think, one of the great strengths of this method. So have you ever used visual mapping, or have you ever seen it before? So I'm trying to speed up through this to show you some examples, which is kind of the most interesting part. So visual mapping can capture geographical connections experienced by the person who is creating the map. In this case, it would be your adolescent or your research participant. It can give you an idea of the social context and the environment, and you might be interested in how that impacts on their well-being or on their daily lives. It might help you understand kind of their sense of belonging, or the places where they feel safe, or they feel not safe, but it gives you a sense of community and neighborhoods and how it is built around children and young people. In terms of what it helps them develop, it has been shown that it supports them to understand space and even explore situations of exclusion and being marginalized, etc. So when we talk about mapping, it's not necessarily through technology. You can do it as well with paper maps or with taking photographs and photo mapping. There are very advanced ways of doing it, like GPS with the interactive maps. Again, that would have a higher cost. The method I have used is My Maps. Has anybody ever used it or seen it before? So My Maps is in Google. So everything you need to have is a Google account. So I'm going to show you some of the ones that I did to play around with myself. You can see it now. So this map I created myself, and it's, for example, do you recognize what place this is? Yeah. So the idea of creating this was just my route from, it's an imaginary because I obviously not live here anymore. But the idea is that I walked through the camera, sorry, from the station, and I kind of marked the different places that I would go to, like a coffee place, the gym, and it's quite useful in the sense that you can, so I'll show you now. If we create a new map, well, I'll show you with this one. So for example, you can select a place and it'll show you what that place is. So you can mark it with this one up here, and I might say, so it tells, you can name it like, and young people could do that, like my favorite. If they know how to spell, it would be great, but family supermarket. So they would save it. They can change the color. So it's this idea of they can personalize it. So if you click on the icon, you can add a different color to it. You can add an icon if you want it. You can look up icons. So for example, I want icons that have to do with food. So I go there and I select it. And now you can see that my place is marked, like my favorite supermarket is now there in the color or in the form that you want. You can also, this icon here is the ruler, so we can calculate, like for example, if I leave the bus, I walk this way to the supermarket, and it will tell you how far it is. You can add arrows as well to show where you want to go. So these are the arrows here. Okay. So the idea of My Map is that you can personalize your route and create like where the places you like to go to and personalize it so you can see the whole route here. One of the most interesting, the things that I like about it as well is that you can say people putting very obviously my house, I live here. So try to keep it, we have to think about the safety in case this was ever released into the public. That's not the idea. You can also download it and delete it from the space and just keep it for research purposes. I have others. I'm going to show you. This is where I want to be. So you can have different maps saved on your account, or if you had a research account, the kids' maps will show up there and you can save them. This one I did in a similar way, and this is Costa Rica, so you're not familiar with this one. So I just went through a little, the places, this is I'm going to walk through the middle. this is the university I went to. So these are the places I went to when I was in the university, and that's what I wanted to show you. So this is one of the malls, and this is a place where I went for food, and I liked going to the museum. So in a way, what I'm showing you is what was important to me at home or my life when I was younger. So you can get loads of information through this, and you can personalize it. You can use your own icons, and that's just one of the ideas of the things that you can do to find out children's environment, where children live, and where children. It's free, it's accessible, and that's why I brought it to this talk, because you only need a Google account to be able to create it. The issue is children would need the software, and you need Wi-Fi as well, and they would need access to at least a computer or some personal device that they can work with. You can also do it on paper, but that would not be technology based, but it would be the same principle. Yeah, as I said, avoid final destinations and that kind of thing. So I gave you the link of some maps, and you will find that in the presentation. And I'm explaining kind of step by step that you can add markers, names of places, change colors, add icons, and all of that is by clicking the way I just did. So going back to more of the theory things, I know we're over time. Probably what I want to show you in the time we have. Are you familiar with sonification at all?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to skip the more theoretical bits. We just ran out of time for them. I do want to show you an example of sonification. So the principle of sonification is the use of data to produce sound. And the idea is that your research data can become a song or can become music, and you're not going to present it necessarily in a graph or in a written form, but you can use music to present it. The advantages is that you protect anonymity very clearly by using this method, because you can't identify individual participants. They're going to become musical notes. It can target different audiences, like maybe audiences that are not used to accessing research or academic research may like to access a more flexible thing like music, or an everyday thing like music. It requires some skill and training. When I learned sonification, I had to learn data programming on Python, and it was a nightmare. I did. I don't know how. If I have to do it again, I would have to really spend a lot of time trying to figure it out again. The good news is there is software now that doesn't require data programming, and one of those softwares is what I want to show you now. If just for a second, just to get a sense of it, if I can just ask you to close your eyes for a moment and just listen to something. If you feel safe to close your eyes, then please do.
Near the battery icon.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so try just to listen to the music instead of reading what's happening. Okay, here we go. Okay, any initial reactions from the music you heard? What do you think it's showing? Yeah, sorry.
Sounding like it's a little bit staccato and a bit crazy sounding at one point.
The same.
And I noticed the impact on my own mood and my physical responses to it. It's making me
Okay.
think about what might be generating that.
That like initial sound we all heard continued throughout the background.
Yep. But what happened to it at some stage?
I got that.
It got crazier. So what you watched was a musical representation of the cases of COVID-19. So it starts with the first cases, and then when it goes crazy is the amount of diagnoses they had in Sweden per day. It's not the nicest topic, but it's really a nice zonification. Is one of I think you do get the sense from it that it started really slow and suddenly went really, really crazy. So you can actually get the sense of almost looking at a graph of data of how things happen, how it went like this, how it went up, how you can see the waves represented there. So this, here it is. This is what he did at first. Using a manual music machine. Okay, so you get kind of the idea. He actually turned his music into proper. This is the music sheet of the song. That is research, and that is, it's a completely different language. What he did was turn his music box. He used programming language, and he created the first song that I showed you. And he actually created sheet music for it. So the things you can do with sonification are fantastic. And I'm not that good, I must say, but I do follow a lot of the things that they have done. So in the presentation, I have more examples, really cool examples of sonification design. So for example, if you go in here, it's very much mostly in the hard sciences. I haven't seen a lot in social sciences, but you can see loads of topics around evictions, the planet. So this page that I give you the link with has thousands of them, if you are interested in listening to different things. Yeah. I kind of love it. What I wanted to show you was this. I wanted to do one live, but I'm not going to do it because of time. So this is an example of software that you can use that doesn't require programming. So if you go into the High Chart Sonification Studio and you go to the app, I created this chart with, are they going to get the presentation materials after? Yeah. So I created some data. No, I didn't create some data. I downloaded some data. So you can actually import the data into the software. It only has to be in a CSV format, and then you can import it. I explain in the presentation step by step of how I did it. I was going to do it in person here, but clearly I didn't realize the 3 hours went so quickly. So the data set is coming from the UK Office for the National Statistics, so it is an actual data set. I didn't make up the data. and is looking at, it's a well-being comparison between the UK and OECD countries. So it's comparing well-being, happiness, different measures. So I explained to you how do you import the data, and that's how it would look in the system. You can create the charts as well. Once you import the data, the software will create the chart for you, and this is what you see here, the different countries. So I have two measures here, the mean rating of life satisfaction and the mean of happiness. It doesn't sound fantastic at this stage, but you can play around with different things. You can also ask the program to create different types of graphs in the way you want to present it. So you can change the type of graph that you're using. So in here, I'm using, this is not appropriate for the type of data I'm using, it's just for the example. So you can change the visualizations in the graph. But for this type of data, you should not use a line graph, by the way. Just saying. Again, in sonification, what the people that are advanced in this field is that the same rules that apply in the real world should apply for sonification. So for example, usually the highest notes will represent, if you're using a scale, like the highest numbers you can get in the scale will be equivalent to the higher notes. So the logic of everyday life has to be incorporated into sonification for it to make sense, otherwise it's not going to make sense. The same goes for the type of charts you use and the type of visualizations you use. There are specific rules, as you know, of the type of data. Like if it's continuous data, you can use a line graph. If it's not continuous data, you better use a bar graph. So those principles are still maintained around sonification. What else can you do? So you can listen to my song, which is not great at the moment because I wanted to change it with you guys. It's terrible, but hang on. You can modify many things using this software. So you can change the speed of the music. You can, if I go down here, you can change the minimum and the maximum notes. Like I included this sonification pack in your sheet, so it explains some things about music theory. You may or may not be interested in this. You may or may not need music theory behind it. I attempted to play the piano when I was young, and that was helpful. But it's not necessary because you can find these things. So, for example, you have the note numbers, and every note is, when we do this kind of digital work, every note has a number. I don't know if you knew that or not. But for example, here, what it means is you can have a range of notes that you can use. So sometimes what I do to make it sound better, and some principles you can use, is use chords that are already established. So that just means that we are aware that those three notes together sound good. You can change the instrument as well that you're playing the music with to make it sound better. So the idea of showing you the software is you can play around and with the music you create, as long as you respect the minimum kind of guidelines around music, preferably, and the use of research. So I'll just leave it there for you to explore, if you want to. I was going to show it to you, but we ran out of time. So just final things to say. This is kind of the conclusions of the book, but I think were relevant as well today, and I hope the message kind of came through, even though I didn't go through all the messages. There is no size fits all. Like as with every research we do, we need to think about the circumstance, the resources, the time, the people we're working with, and what we're trying to do. adolescents have something to say in the correct environment where they feel somebody seriously wants to listen to them. And that's kind of the challenge, to make sure that we create that safe environment. I did mention this, you do not make promises you cannot keep or you're not willing to keep. And that's important, just to be honest all the time. It's an invitation to make mistakes as well. Sometimes things work, sometimes things don't work. And I don't think I've ever been judged by an adolescent because I did something wrong. They instead try to help me. So I'm never afraid to work with them. And perhaps my sonification that day sounded really bad. That's fine. They help me improve it. Or sometimes we'll have somebody with, what music instrument would you like us to play? Or what would you change here? Where would you change the speed? And things like that. I think this has been very clear, like participatory takes time, effort, and I see it as an investment. The world outside doesn't necessarily see it as an investment, but I do think it is. Change takes time, takes effort. I think it's worth doing. Start small and persevere. Like, you don't have to do a full participatory research. You can have a participatory component as part of a wider research study, and that is still participation. Training, don't underestimate the need for training for yourself and for the people that are going to be part of the research. Let adolescents be your teachers too, then that's just how I see it. Ethics are not negotiable, they're mandatory. As I said, technology changes very quickly and we have to change with it. It's important to surround yourself with like-minded people like this place. So when, for example, when I was invited to come here, I'm like, yes, I'm going. Of course I'm going. Because this place it's special. And now that I've been far away from it, it's more real to me how special it is. Because I haven't found this in other places that I've been to. Don't forget you were an adolescent yourself once. And how you would like to be treated and how that was for you. And my never give up is important as well. Like this area is tricky. We've covered only a small section of things that could go wrong, that things we need to think about, things we need to be careful about. It's a lovely area, but there are still things that need to be better developed and better understood and negotiated as well. So, yeah. Any last questions, anything that I can help with? Let me know. You will have my email. If you need help at any stage, you can contact me at any time. And thanks for coming and thanks for staying and taking part in everything.